Oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding the newest exotic scout rifle, Wicked Implement. Now, rather than piling on to what has already been said about this scout rifle, let's instead take the time to break down what this weapon has to offer and compare it against our other exotic scout rifles that we have available in the sandbox. So, let's begin. Let's start with a perk breakdown on Wicked Implement. Wicked Implement comes with the perk Creeping Attrition. Rapidly landing precision hits causes targets to become slowed. It takes about 3 shots to proc this effect, and you will hear a sound effect when it becomes active. It sounds like a hive scream. Next up is the perk Tithing Harvest. This perk states that final blows while Creeping Attrition is active create a stasis shard that returns to you. Collecting stasis shards refills the magazine. It's a full refund of all of your magazine, 15 rounds, without the catalyst complete. Last is the catalyst perk Hadopelagic Tribute. This perk states that when collecting a stasis shard, it will gradually overflow the magazine. It will overflow the magazine by 5 each time you collect a stasis shard with a full magazine. So let's talk about the gameplay loop with using this weapon. You'll want to land a few headshots and proc Creeping Attrition. The next precision final blow with that perk active is going to refill your mag. So you can slow enemies enough to eventually freeze them and generate stasis shards on a stasis subclass. Wicked Implement has gotten a lot of negative feedback, but how does it stack up to its exotic brethren? Let's take a look at a side-by-side test on 1830 Legend difficulty. Test number 1, Dead Man's Tale versus Wicked Implement. This is Dead Man's Tale with no kinetic bonus from matching the surge. This is purely a head-to-head comparison. Our Dead Man's Tale does have Vorpal Weapon, so it does benefit from a 20% bonus against champions from this perk. Another option that would make Dead Man's Tale great is 4th times the charm. The time spent reloading would probably offset the damage boost, and the time would almost be identical in our opinion. And there we have Dead Man's Tale coming out on top in that head-to-head test. Next, let's take a look at Skyburner's Oath and see how it compares to Wicked Implement. Skyburner's doesn't have any fancy damage perks or bonuses against taken enemies. It has the hipfire perk, but that doesn't change the RPM on the weapon anymore. It does provide very minimal scorch, but not even enough to proc an ignition in the time it takes to kill this overload. These two weapons were the closest in comparison based on time. However, Skyburner's managed to come out on top here. Our last test is against Symmetry. Now, there was an arc surge that was changing the time to kill for this weapon, so we wanted to slow the footage by 25% to compensate for the extra 25% outgoing damage that the weapon was receiving. It's almost impossible, aside from a Templar checkpoint, to get the right numbers, as every enemy moves too much or won't allow for a clean fight to get proper testing. Nonetheless, the extra damage from Dynamic Charge would help push Symmetry ahead. The last test is against Polaris Lance, and the reason that it's the last test is because Touch of Malice is not allowed to be used with the artifact mods, for whatever reason. Polaris, without surges here, sweeps the competition away. Because of its design, it doesn't require you to reload as long as you continue to hit precision shots. Because of that, and its beefy explosions on every 5th headshot, it really puts the other exotic scout rifles in the dust when it comes to killing overload champions. With all of that out of the way, let's look at the results. You're going to see that Polaris is the only sub-20-second kill. One of the big issues these weapons face is that their damage profile is low, which makes sense. Scouts are intended to be used from a safe distance, but the fact that you're caught reloading so much with these weapons is the biggest drawback. Dead Man's Tale is helped out a good bit by having Vorpal Weapon or even 4th times the charm. The hipfire RPM increase requires good precision and short to medium ranges, so it does have its own drawbacks as well. Wicked Implement is hit the hardest when it comes to dealing with high health targets because all of its perks are based on kills. And I know this is just one facet of what makes an exotic weapon good, There are more intrinsic benefits to look at that provide value, but this was just the first aspect of our discussion. We'll next look at the overall value they offer in what we'll call their well-roundedness. To begin, let's talk about Wicked Implement. It's essentially providing us a way to stun two different champion types without ever applying an artifact mod, all with just the use of primary ammo. That's a solid benefit that this weapon provides. When a weapon can fit seamlessly into a build, by having perks that flow in tandem, it helps provide more utility when build crafting. That is where Wicked Implement has strong utility. It can interact with Whisper of Rending, Whisper of Durance, and can help you gain armor charges through the newly redesigned mod Elemental Charge. However, its weaknesses are made apparent. It staggers minor enemies in a strange way, it doesn't one-shot red bar enemies on Legend difficulty, and it just generally feels as if it lacks utility when using it against high-health targets. We'll provide a final slide that will showcase all of the strengths and weaknesses of each exotic later, but for now we'll highlight the key points we discussed regarding Wicked Implement on the screen. Next, we'll be moving on to talk about Deadman's Tale. The first thing that you will be able to clearly notice is the ability to one-shot red bar minor enemies at Legend difficulty. Each minor enemy we kill can stack Cranial Spike. The gun intuitively intertwines its perks together. Stack Cranial Spike, get more range and aim assistance, allowing you to hit precision hits more easily. Move to hipfire mode with max Cranial Spike and see a substantial increase in your RPM. The gun is a no-frills gun. It's all about feel. It's all about gunplay. It's not too fancy, aside from maybe the hipfire RPM changes based on the stacks of Cranial Spike. But aside from that, it's just all about clicking heads and the satisfactory feeling you'll get from this gun when doing just that. It's not without its flaws either. The gun is somewhat a relic. It predates the crafted exotics of Witch Queen or Lightfall. Think Revision Zero, Vexcalibur, or Osteostriga. Aside from securing the best roll possible, its weakness lies in that it has a singular column perk and instead has a stock as its second perk. This limits the gun's potential severely, even if the gun was intended primarily for PvP initially. It could use a rework for another trait column that could possibly make it the strongest in this list. Imagine 4th times the charm and Vorpal weapon. I want to move on to next talking about Skyburner's Oath, its strengths, weaknesses, and overall utility. Skyburner's is another exotic scout rifle that has another special hipfire mechanic to it. When hip-firing Skyburner's Oath, the explosion is larger and will apply Scorch to the target. It also has the perk, For the Empire, where it will deal extra damage to Cabal and also penetrates Phalanx shields. Having hipfire provides a lot of utility because it allows you to be more mobile, strafing around cover while peek shooting and giving the gun the ability to Scorch. The Scorch, when combined with other methods of applying Scorch, can help you push towards creating an ignition, as well as blend into your fragments that can generate fire sprites, or just generally provide you some form of ability energy through aspects or fragments with your solar subclass. This gun has the same problem that Wicked Implement has. It's really only good for dealing with minor enemies, barring champions for Wicked Implement, but it does deal with them more effectively than Wicked Implement does. The next gun we'll take a quick stab at is Symmetry. Let's start discussing its strengths and weaknesses. Symmetry, while it feels good as a rapid-firing scout rifle, has an abysmal reload animation duration. It honestly kills the weapon with how poor the reload speed is on the gun. Now I understand that this was probably put in place as a limitation, so it wasn't so easily accessible in PvP, but God does it hurt it so bad in PvE. Before we talk about minor enemies, let's talk about this alternate firing mode, because it ties into how it works against high health targets, a design that Wicked Implement could have pulled some inspiration from. After earning precision hits, you build up charges. Swapping firing modes gives you a partial reload and fires arc seekers that can help burst down high health targets, as seen in our side-by-side testing earlier. When it comes to minor enemies, the rapid fire rate of Symmetry really helps the gun feel that it's holding its own against minor enemies. If you happen to miss a shot, the high fire rate helps you get right back on track and is forgiving for this weapon. All in all, it's a decent gun, but the reload just kills this weapon. Having to alternate the firing modes back and forth to get the most out of the weapon reminds you of how bad this stat is and is a constant pain point. Aside from that, it feels decent, but maybe just a bit underwhelming in terms of its damage output. Our last scout, rest in peace to Touch of Malice, is going to be Polaris Lance, so let's see what makes Polaris Lance tick. Polaris Lance comes with the exotic perk called the Perfect Fifth. Basically, what this does, landing 4 precision shots in a row will load a delayed solar explosive round that will apply 40 plus 20 scorch stacks when you land your next shot. Right off the bat, we know that we have solar subclass synergy. Now also, we'll have Dragonfly as part of the catalyst on the weapon. Both the Perfect Fifth and the Dragonfly shot can stack together, which is nice for ad clearing, but we also get Zen Moment to help the overall feel of the gun. One standout weakness of the gun is that low handling stat of 24, making the gun feel very sluggish and unappealing to use as a result. Honestly, with all of the strengths of this weapon, we can take the trade-off of low handling. It's able to one-shot minor enemies on Legend difficulty without the help of any surges. And because landing precision shots keeps you from having to reload often, the gun will perform great against high-health targets. We basically looked at every exotic scout rifle side by side, as well as individually, to think about, compare, and contrast all of their utility, strengths, and weaknesses. I don't think it would have been fair to just talk about Wicked Implement in isolation. With everything we have discussed, I think it's fair enough to now look at every exotic scout rifle and really give ourselves a solid idea of our newest exotic scout rifle, Wicked Implement. Polaris is sitting at the top of our list, as its only weak point is the handling stat. Symmetry feels good, but its lack of subclass synergy would probably place it lower if we had to directly rank the weapon purely on its utility. Skyburners may struggle with single target damage, but having a bonus against an entire enemy faction, as well as subclass synergy, definitely keeps it higher up in its ranking. Deadman's Tale is a great feeling gun, but struggles much like Wicked Implement does when it comes to single target damage due to the reloading factor. Wicked Implement, for all of its strengths, is outweighed heavily by its flaws. Poor single target damage against mini-bosses, it struggles to one-shot minor enemies. It oddly knocks minor enemies back, and its synergy with the subclass is so minuscule that it's barely noticeable. If you forced us at gunpoint to make a tier list, this is probably what we would settle on. You've got to respect the classics. In this list, rest in peace to Touch of Malice, we would feel pretty content with where each gun sits currently. A small tweak to Symmetry could see Symmetry right on par with Polaris Lance. Skyburners may not feel very flashy, but being able to deal extra damage on an entire enemy faction gives it a huge leg up against its competitors for certain Nightfall activities like Proving Grounds or the Arms Dealer. Wicked Implement just falls short here because it's not often that you really need to rely on freezing champions. Osmiomancy gloves can do this for you without you having to sacrifice your exotic weapon just to do so. I would rather reserve my exotic weapon for something like Witherhoard or Osteostriga because you can get more out of those weapons and not feel as if you're sacrificing your build just to stun champions. Let's wrap up, and we will provide our closing thoughts on Wicked Implement. I know it's been a long discussion thus far, but hold up and let us cook. We're almost done, we promise. First, the catalyst doesn't help the gun in any way when you're mid-fight with a champion or a high-health target. The gun was designed as a champion counter, but the only benefits the exotic traits and catalyst help with are after defeating an enemy, and even then, it's just extra ammo on a primary ammo exotic weapon. You're still going to get caught reloading because the damage profile is so low on the weapon, and you don't receive any of these ammo benefits like triple tap or 4th times the charm when you're actively engaging with a champion or a high health target. In any context, we need to think about what is the most effective tool or tactic available. When you compare something like Deadman's Tale to Wicked Implement, you will see that one tool is more effective than the other. And while some may argue that it's safer to use one of these tools that will provide crowd control from a safe distance, we still need to think about how we can get that same crowd control from our subclass and not just our weapons. Riptide is honestly more effective than this, and yes, it's a special ammo weapon, but its damage profile really helps you burst down targets more effectively than just plinking at them from half a mile away. This is a disappointment. Giving us a couple more bullets back for a gun that is bad still makes it a bad gun. That doesn't make the gun any better, whether or not it completely refills the magazine or even overflows it. It's still a bad gun. It seems like they're out of ideas for Stasis Exotics with alternate firing modes. Ager's Scepter stole the alternate firing laser mode. Cryosthesia already has the kill clip freeze on demand alternate firing mode. Salvation's Grip has the Glacier Wall alternate firing mode. Verglas Curve already has the arrows that convert into glacier walls on hipfire alternate firing mode. What about the concept? Much like Fallen Sunstar, where we could get double the benefits of stasis shards that we collect from this weapon. We could have had the enemy faction damage bonus just like Skyburner's Oath, where we could deal more damage to hive targets when using Wicked Implement. We could have had the effect of Ice Flare bolts somehow as an alternate firing mechanism as well. Maybe with the range balancing in the upcoming meta, this weapon could be lethal in Crucible, and that's why it's being shipped out in its current weaker state. But this is basically another Symmetry, another clunky, uninspiring gun that just makes us frustrated to use. Hell, shoot to loot, and kinetic tremors on the hung jury feels more exotic to use than this gun. And when we factor in that this was part of our season pass, the one that was just increased to $12 instead of its original price, then we have a right to be frustrated about how lackluster the gun feels. At the end of the day, this ain't it, Chief. It just ain't it. As much as I want it to be it, it ain't it. It honestly gives us a headache just trying to find a way to make this weapon function and feel effective. As always, your viewership is appreciated. Stay tuned for the next one, and we'll see you next time. Peace out, homies. Keep your light up.